Chapter 35. Courier Duty. Wight's brigade checked in with the clerks in the headquarters. It was the most active they had ever seen it. The clerks were rushing about from person to person. Troops were going in and out with messages. A number of people in castle livery were also on hand to answer questions or to take down messages. Eventually they were noticed, and the man who usually dealt with them smiled and came right over. "Good to see you. I've heard nothing but good reports about you. We will be extending your guard contract for another 3 days, if you accept that. We don't have much time for training right now. After that, we will be offering you an extended courier mission, probably about a month or two long, if that would be of interest." Delta looked around. "I can see you're busy right now, so I won't press for details. We need to discuss it and see the exact request, but I think we will probably say yes." "I can plan around that," said the clerk. He counted out their pay, half in silver, half in brass commissary coins. "Please see the officer of the day for quarters and your place on the duty roster." They saluted and left the clerk to his business. First, they got the donkeys and wagon quartered in the stable, then got Gwen to their quarters. When they reported for duty, the sergeant gave them a quarter of the city and a name to report to for rubble cleaning and general cleanup. It was dirty work, but fairly mindless. They had worn their nice white tabards, and on account of that, the lieutenant in charge decided that they would be better off directing the people filling the carts and clearing a path for the carts as they moved to where the fill was to be dumped. Gwen was given night patrol. She was to stalk the city at night and scare the crap out of anyone acting suspicious. It was a duty that she delighted in. In their off time, they tracked down a seamstress and a washerwoman. They had a second set of tabards made, and the designs embroidered on them, instead of being painted. The wagon was brought to a Wainwright to make some of the more extensive modifications they wanted, and to prepare it for a longer journey. They were summoned where the operations were set up a few days later. The general was ensconced in the castle with the Count Metra, and they had been engaged in writing messages to all the other senior landed nobility of Avignon, including the king himself. They had detailed a list of which messages were to be delivered to whom. "We feel it would be best to have a nominally neutral third party deliver these, and we want them delivered safely and securely, so if they are armed, so much the better." He showed them the elaborate tubes the messages were to be stored in. "Each is addressed and sealed like so. If it is opened by other than who it is designated for, the message will be blanked. So, in the worst case, if someone tries to get at them, let them. Do not lay down your life for these messages. Their loss would be an inconvenience, not a calamity." "That's very kind of you," said Delta. She and Zipper exchanged glances. Here was more of the practical magic that they had heard so much of. "I expect the recipients will have many questions for you. You may speak freely, all of what you've seen or partaken in. That, too, is part of the message that we are sending." He smiled confidently. It all seemed good. The wages were the usual mediocre amount, but the duty was light. They took the job. They were serious when they said they had letters for everyone, Viscount or higher. The destinations were scattered across the length and breadth of Avignon, all major towns south of Metra, as they, pretty much, had the north all tied up. It was mostly civilized country, with little general danger on the road. They had remounted their pole arms into vertical loopholes, since they weren't trying to be subtle. They even flew pennants from them. Brigands avoided them, and officials let them pass when they explained their missions and showed their scrolls. The only part where they met any difficulty was when they decided to overland from Rouviers to Tukio. A last finger of the mountains that made up the world's spine jutted out into the belly of Avignon there, and the unsettled land was fairly trackless and wild. The wagon proved difficult, and they had to lift it at times. But they had replaced the wheels by now with good iron and reinforced ones, so the main hindrance was speed. The donkeys, by now, were in much better shape and had finally warmed to the ministrations of Zipper. The whole area put Gwen in high spirits, although there was only one outcropping that rose to her standard of being called a mountain. The fact that there were slopes and you could actually see the terrain around you was something she found very comforting. Their mutual comprehension of language had also improved a lot on the road, and seeing all of this loosened their tongues, and they exchanged much information about their childhoods, where they came from. After a day or so ride on the wild lands, she pointed out to them a pile of stones that was a territorial marker. She was quite excited and said that they should be able to negotiate not just passage, but an escort and probably help over the rough bits. They decided it was a lot better than fighting their way through. Following her direction, they spent the afternoon laying out their blankets and a selection of their tools and stores. Nothing they couldn't do without or replace. but that, she said, could be appealing to the locals. They built a fire and waited for night to come. And when it did, so did the goblins. They had been spotted as soon as they entered the valley, and they were expected. What was unexpected was that they would stop and do them respect. This curiosity brought them out, including the chief. Gwen did most of the speaking, being fluent. The accent was different, but it was mostly comprehensible. She explained the clan she came from, which had been distantly heard of, and that she was now working for Delta, who served as an itinerant chief. They were quite taken aback when Delta made a few comments herself in Goblin. The negotiators considered for several moments how much of what they said had been understood. After that, the conversation was much more measured and respectful. Deals were made and goods were exchanged. Passage was bought, not just through their territory, but they also negotiated on behalf of the other tribes on the route, no doubt taking a measured cut from the top. They even promised a grant to help porter the wagon over a specifically difficult bit, to shave an extra day off their journey. Several of the blankets interested them as well, as the cloth from the top that they had rigged up for the wagon. They could weave, but it was long and laborious, and they did not raise wool-bearing animals. Similarly, the sewing kit, and especially the needles they had, were highly prized. They were good with iron, but not good on such a small scale. There was a bit of stir when they realized that Gwen did not have the use of her legs. She had been conducting her business while appearing to sit cross-legged. However, negotiations were so far progressed at that point that they downplayed it and steamed ahead. On their side, Delta and Zipper coveted their chainmail. Goblin armor wasn't as good as dwarven armor, but the price was much more reasonable. Fortunately, the goblins did not have any that would fit them, and they did not have the time for them to resize any pieces. Otherwise, they would have spent much more of their savings on it. They did pick up some well-tanned leather and furs for general use, and to make their wagon more comfortable. They conversed much with their escort on the way through the region, both to improve their accent and vocabulary, but also to glean what sort of things they would find valuable in trade in the future, for a shirt of chainmail or aventail. At a high saddle between the two hills, they parted with the escort. It commanded a good view of the slope ahead, and after looking around for a bit, Delta got her perspective aligned. This was where she grew up, and certain parts of it formed the skylines of her youth. Once their message was delivered to Tukyo, they took a couple of days for Delta to visit her with her family and relations. They were both delighted and proud to see her, especially when she insisted on leaving a majority of her savings with them, either to keep for her or to use there as needed. She introduced both Zipper and Gwen to her old mentor, who was now quite elderly. He listened with interest at her war stories, but tended to nod off. Eventually, after replacing miscellaneous goods they had traded to the goblins, they continued with their journey. They traveled along the southern border before turning northward and going up the coast, finally arriving at Germanis, the capital city and seat of the kingdom of Avenio.